Confessions, Augustine's journey from sin to grace. Welcome to this audio summary of Confessions by Augustine of Hippo. Over the next few minutes, we'll explore one of the most influential spiritual autobiographies ever written, a 4th century text that remains strikingly relevant today. Whether you're familiar with Augustine's work or encountering it for the first time, this summary will guide you through his remarkable journey, from restless seeker to devoted believer, while examining the profound philosophical questions he raises about memory, time, desire, and human nature. Let's dive in. Introduction: a timeless spiritual autobiography. Written around 397 to 400 AD, Augustine of Hippo's Confessions stands as one of the most influential works in Western literature and Christian theology. This isn't merely a personal memoir. It's a profound philosophical and theological exploration of memory, time, desire, and the human relationship with God. Augustine, who would become Bishop of Hippo and one of Christianity's most important thinkers, crafted this work as both a public confession of his sins and a meditation on divine grace. What makes this text remarkable is its raw honesty. Augustine doesn't present himself as a hero or saint from birth. Instead, he reveals his struggles with lust, ambition, pride, and intellectual confusion. He spent years pursuing worldly pleasures and philosophical systems that left him empty, before finally embracing Christianity at age 32. The Confessions documents this transformation while addressing universal questions. Why do humans desire what harms them? What is the nature of time? How can we find lasting happiness? How does memory shape identity? The book's influence extends far beyond theology. It pioneered the autobiography as a literary form, influenced countless writers from Rousseau to Thomas Merton, and introduced psychological insights that feel surprisingly modern. Augustine's exploration of infant jealousy, adolescent peer pressure, and adult anxiety resonates across centuries, making his ancient text feel strikingly contemporary. The Restless Heart, Augustine's early years. Augustine begins with one of literature's most famous lines: "His heart is restless until it finds rest in God." This sets the tone for everything that follows. He's writing to God, not primarily to human readers, which gives the work an intimate, prayerful quality. Yet he's also acutely aware of his audience, using his personal story to illustrate broader truths about human nature. His examination of infancy is fascinating. Augustine doesn't romanticize childhood as innocent. Instead, he observes the selfishness of babies, their jealous rage when another infant nurses, their manipulative cries. He's making a theological point about original sin, but he's also demonstrating remarkable psychological observation. He suggests that we're born with disordered desires that need correction and formation. His famous theft of pears as a teenager becomes a meditation on sin's irrationality. He and his friends stole fruit they didn't want from a tree near their vineyard, simply for the thrill of doing wrong. This wasn't theft motivated by hunger or poverty. It was sin for sin's sake. Augustine uses this seemingly trivial incident to explore why humans do evil, even when it brings no pleasure or benefit. He concludes that he desired the transgression itself, the rebellion against order. This analysis of human motivation, how we can want what we know will harm us, remains psychologically acute. The Search for Truth, Philosophy and False Paths. Augustine's intellectual journey takes him through various philosophical systems, each promising truth but leaving him unsatisfied. As a young man, he embraced Manichaeism, a dualistic religion that divided reality into competing forces of light and darkness, good and evil. This appealed to his rational mind because it seemed to explain evil's existence without blaming God. If evil comes from an independent, dark principle, then God isn't responsible for suffering. But Augustine eventually found Manichaeism intellectually shallow. When he met Faustus, a celebrated Manichaean teacher, he he discovered the man couldn't answer his deeper questions. This disillusionment was painful, but necessary. Augustine describes how we can become attached to inadequate ideas, defending them not because they're true, but because abandoning them feels like admitting we wasted years believing falsehoods. His encounter with Neoplatonism, the philosophical school derived from Plato, proved more fruitful. The Neoplatonists taught that reality is hierarchical, with a transcendent one at the top, and that evil is merely the absence of good rather than a positive force. This solved his intellectual problem with evil, and helped him conceive of God as purely spiritual rather than material. However, philosophy alone couldn't transform his life. He could intellectually accept truth without having the will to live according to it. The problem of the will. Knowing good, but doing evil. One of Augustine's most profound contributions is his analysis of the divided will. He describes a period when he intellectually accepted Christianity's truth, but couldn't commit to living it. He was trapped in sexual relationships and worldly ambitions that he knew were ultimately empty, yet he couldn't break free. He famously prayed, "Grant me chastity and continence, but not yet," a perfectly honest admission that he wanted to change but feared losing the pleasures that enslaved him. This internal conflict leads to sophisticated psychological analysis. Augustine realizes that the problem isn't lack of knowledge, but weakness of will. He can see the right path clearly, but remains paralyzed. He observes how the mind can command the body. Tell your hand to move, and it moves instantly without resistance. But when the mind commands itself to make a decision, something strange happens. The will seems divided against itself, one part willing and another part resisting. This isn't a battle between body and soul, as the Platonists thought, but rather a civil war within the will itself. He concludes that the will is divided against itself. This isn't a battle between body and soul, as Platonists thought. Rather, it's a civil war within the will itself. Part of him genuinely wants transformation. Another part clings desperately to familiar pleasures. This analysis anticipates modern psychology's understanding of ambivalence and self-sabotage, while also establishing a theological framework for understanding human powerlessness without divine grace. The Garden Conversion. Grace breaks through. The climax of Augustine's spiritual journey occurs in a Milan garden. At age 32, tormented by indecision, he throws himself under a fig tree, weeping. He hears a child's voice from a neighboring house singing, "Take up and read, take up and read." Interpreting this as divine command, he opens Paul's letters and reads a passage, urging readers to abandon debauchery and put on Christ. At that moment, his resistance collapses. He describes it not as his own achievement, but as grace breaking through his defenses. The divided will becomes whole. This isn't about gathering more information or making a stronger resolution. It's about receiving power from beyond himself to do what he couldn't do alone. For Augustine, this demonstrates that salvation is God's gift, not human accomplishment. This conversion experience establishes a model followed by countless later Christian testimonies. There's a pattern: intellectual searching, moral struggle, a moment of crisis, sudden transformation through divine intervention, and subsequent peace. Augustine presents conversion not as a rational decision made by an autonomous individual, but as a liberation of the will that was enslaved to disordered desires. Memory and identity. The mind's vast palace. In the book's later sections, Augustine explores memory with philosophical sophistication that anticipates modern cognitive science. He describes memory as a vast palace with countless chambers storing images, sensations, emotions, and concepts. When we remember, we're not passively retrieving stored data, but actively reconstructing experiences. This leads to puzzling questions. How can we remember forgetting? Where are memories when we're not thinking about them? How do we recognize something as a memory rather than imagination? Augustine realizes that memory is fundamental to identity. We are, in large part, what we remember. Yet memory is also unreliable and selective, raising questions about who we really are. He's particularly interested in how we remember God. We can't have a visual image of the divine, yet we long for God and recognize spiritual truth when we encounter it. This suggests that knowledge of God is somehow latent within us, needing to be awakened rather than learned from scratch. This idea would influence Christian theology for centuries, suggesting humans have an innate orientation toward transcendence, even when they're unaware of it. Time and eternity. What is time? Augustine's meditation on time remains philosophically profound. He asks, what is time? If no one asks, he knows. If someone asks him to explain, he doesn't know. The past no longer exists. The future doesn't exist yet. The present has no duration. It's the knife edge between past and future. So where is time? He proposes that time exists in the mind as a threefold present: the present of past things, memory; the present of present things, immediate, perception; and the present of future things, expectation. Time, then, is a feature of consciousness, not an objective container in which events occur. God, being eternal, experiences all moments simultaneously, in an eternal present without succession. This analysis influenced centuries of philosophy and theology. It raises questions about free will and divine foreknowledge, about whether the universe has a beginning, and about consciousness's role in constructing temporal experience. Augustine doesn't resolve all these puzzles, but he articulates them with clarity that makes them seem urgent and relevant. Interpretation and meaning. Reading Genesis. The final books turn to interpreting Genesis's creation account. This might seem like an odd ending for a personal autobiography, but Augustine is demonstrating how to read Scripture properly. He argues against literal, simplistic readings, suggesting that biblical texts contain multiple valid meanings that readers discover according to their capacities. He's interested in how language creates meaning and how interpretation requires humility. Different readers can understand the same text differently without either being wrong, as long as their interpretations align with truth and charity. This sophisticated hermeneutical approach would influence how Christians read the Bible for centuries. He also returns to philosophical questions about creation. How did God create time if time itself was created? What was God doing before creation? Augustine's answer, that these questions misunderstand God's eternity, shows his ability to think rigorously about seemingly impossible problems. The enduring legacy of Confessions. Augustine's Confessions revolutionized how people understand personal identity, spiritual transformation, and the relationship between human will and divine grace. Before this book, autobiographies typically celebrated the author's achievements. Augustine, instead, exposed his failures, arguing that honesty about weakness magnifies divine mercy. The work established patterns for thinking about conversion, not as a single moment, but as a process involving intellectual searching, moral struggle, crisis, and breakthrough. It demonstrated that philosophy and theology aren't abstract academic exercises, but responses to existential questions that determine how we live. Perhaps most importantly, Augustine showed that ancient people experienced psychological complexities we imagine are distinctly modern. His descriptions of anxiety, self-deception, addiction, and the divided self resonate, because human nature hasn't fundamentally changed. We still struggle with knowing what's good while doing what's harmful. We still seek happiness in things that can't ultimately satisfy. We still wonder about time, memory, and meaning. The Confessions remains influential because Augustine addresses permanent features of human experience with intellectual rigor and emotional honesty. Whether readers share his religious conclusions or not, they recognize the authenticity of his struggles and the profundity of his questions. Conclusion. Confessions is ultimately about the human search for meaning and the discovery that satisfaction comes not from external achievements or pleasures, but from proper relationship with transcendent reality. Augustine's journey from ambitious young intellectual to surrendered believer demonstrates how transformation requires more than information. It requires grace that reorders desire itself. For modern readers, the book offers several gifts. It models intellectual honesty and shows that doubt and questioning are part of faith, not its opposite. It demonstrates psychological insight about human motivation and self-deception. It explores philosophical questions about time, memory, and consciousness that remain unresolved. And it presents a vision of human life, oriented toward transcendence, rather than merely material or social success. Whether you approach it as religious testimony, philosophical inquiry, psychological observation, or literary masterpiece, Augustine's Confessions rewards careful reading. It's a work that has shaped Western civilization, while remaining accessible and relevant to contemporary struggles. If you found this exploration of Augustine's spiritual and philosophical journey valuable, I'd truly appreciate it if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are many more book summaries and analyses available here that might interest you. If this particular discussion of Confessions resonated with you, consider purchasing the book through the link in the description below. There's nothing quite like engaging with Augustine's original words. And if you enjoy learning through audiobooks, check out the Audible link below to access thousands of titles, including complete versions of classics like this one. Thanks for watching.